What do you think is the most important part of your IELTS speaking exam? Here on YouTube, we talk a lot about part 1, a bit less about part 2, and even less about part 3. But actually, it's part 3 that matters most. That's where examiners push you to the limit to check how advanced your skills really are. Even though it only lasts for 5 minutes, I promise you, you'll be delighted to hear the magic words, "Thank you, this is the end of the speaking test." Let's talk today about how to make the most out of those 5 minutes. It's Asia. Let's get started. At first glance, IELTS Speaking Part 1 and Part 3 are quite similar. Both last for 5 minutes. Both are about answering questions. But there are some big differences. The test starts out being pretty personal. In Part 1, you'll be talking about yourself, your experiences and opinions on topics that might include education, culture, sports and science. Part 1 is the all-important first impression. All the questions are about you. Here are some examples. Let's talk about commercials or advertising. Do you see many commercials or adverts in your daily life? What kind of adverts do you like most? Do you usually watch an advert on TV from start to finish? Would you buy something because of an advert you saw? Yes, questions become progressively more complex because they invite you to use more complex grammar. But your answers don't have to be very long. Part 1 lasts for not more than 5 minutes, including the identity check and introduction. This means you have to answer at least 11 questions on 3 topics in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. This gives you an average of 20-25 seconds for each question and answer. Here's how it looks. Do you usually watch an advert on TV from start to finish? No. I hardly ever watch adverts. In fact, I usually turn off the volume on the remote when I see them. To be honest, they really irritate me because as soon as ads come on, the volume goes up. Apparently, the sound just seems louder because of some technicality, so advertisers get away with it. Part 3, however, is a continuation of Part 2. Let's imagine your Part 2 topic was describe an advertisement you remember well. The lead into Part 3 is when the examiner says, "We've been talking about an advertisement you remember well, and I'd like to ask you some more general questions about this. Let's consider..." Here is what's interesting. The examiner has more freedom of choice in Part 3. Part 3 questions are divided into 3 groups or sets, and the examiner will choose 2 of them. The sets are progressively more complex. For example, in set 1, you may be asked to identify, classify, compare and contrast. But in sets 2 and 3, you have to analyze, agree or disagree, discuss causes and effects, make predictions and hypothesize. What the examiner does is choose 2 of the 3 sets, either sets 1 and 2 for your typical Band 6 candidate, or sets 2 and 3 for test takers likely to get higher band score, Band 7 or higher. The examiner will ask questions based on the bullet points but doesn't have to follow the script word by word. So it's very different to Part 1 where the examiner cannot go off script. In a way, in Part 3, the examiner gets more personally involved in a hope of creating a kind of genuine discussion and is encouraged to ask follow-up questions. At the same time, in Part 3, you have to talk in general terms, not about yourself. Let's look at an example. Here is a typical Part 3 Set 3 question. How important is it for advertisers to tell the truth in advertisements? Well, I guess advertisers should be honest and tell customers exactly what they're buying because if not, they would lose trust in the product and the company that makes it. Of course, those customers most likely would never come back to buy the same product again in the future. Besides that, there is always the risk of someone suing the company. I think there are laws about that in the USA, for example. I mean, being sued is certainly not good for the lasting image of a company. What's the first thing you noticed about this answer? Yes, of course, it's much longer than in part 1, right? In part 3, you should give extended answers. Let's talk about it. Part 3 is your chance to show how you can put your thoughts together using a variety of complex grammatical structures and using both general and precise vocabulary. It's important to give as much context as possible to your answers by explaining reasons or causes, giving examples, comparing, predicting the future, or speculating on the past and present. And at the same time, remember to avoid only talking about yourself and your own experience. Let's look again at the example about advertising. I've marked some parts. Look, see how with those parts marked in green, you can join ideas together, explaining with because, giving a condition with if not, adding information with besides that, and providing an example with for example. In the extended answer, the examiner will also be impressed by your grammar. I marked some of the more complex structures in blue. Conditional sentences and using modal verbs should, might, could, and so on are always good ways to show off your grammatical knowledge. In yellow, I've highlighted a couple of interesting collocations. The risk of something happening or somebody doing something, and something is not good for the image of, we could also say it's certainly bad for the lasting image of the company. You know, I timed myself giving this answer. Maybe in a real exam situation, I would have more natural pauses to give me time to think or whatever. But it took me around 35 seconds. Add a few seconds for the question and let's call it 40. Okay, you have 5 minutes for part 3, 20 seconds of introduction from the examiner, 40 seconds per question. This means that in part 3, you get a maximum of 6 main questions. The examiner may ask some small questions to help you develop your answers if they are shorter. I think it's a great idea to practice answering questions in timed conditions. In my course, I have recorded practice tests where I left time for your answer. Those tests can help you understand how much time you have. You can also do it yourself, time yourself, or ask a friend. Now, let's talk about some tricky questions. Look at an example about patience. Older people are more patient. Why is that? Actually, before we look at the reply, notice that the question itself is a little tricky. It's not an open question with a how, what, where, who, or whatever. It's a statement followed by a question. This type of question can be confusing because for many people it's easier to agree with someone than disagree. Here, shall we assume that older people really are more patient than the young? What if you don't agree? Well, don't be afraid to disagree. It's a great way to impress the examiner with your language skills. Well, I don't know if that is necessarily true. Although, yes, my grandparents' generation grew up in a world where work and private life were quite separate. You went to work and then went home. The two didn't mix. And that gave them more time for things. They weren't always in a hurry. On the other hand, nowadays, with technology, all that is changing. We've become accustomed to having so much of our life and information at our fingertips, literally on the mobile. And that's affecting everybody, young and old. The reply moves from apparently disagreeing with the statement, well, I don't know if that is necessarily true, to changing the focus completely with, on the other hand. IELTS speaking topics cover a very wide range, and we can't know about everything. We can't always have an opinion to give in an instant. That's why it's always a good idea to learn a few useful phrases to keep the talk flowing while you're thinking about what to say next. A great example of this, in my opinion, is the Part 3 follow-up to the Part 2 topic. Describe a time when you visited a farm. What if you've grown up in a city and know next to nothing about farming? Part 2, you've survived somehow by talking about some childhood memories of a holiday in the countryside near some farms. But then in Part 3, you hear this question: how will farms look in the future? As you're not too sure what they look like now, what on earth can you say about the future? We need to think of something to say fast. And we do have a lot of useful, commonly used filler words and short phrases we can call on. Examples? There are so many. To be honest, well, to tell you the truth, in my opinion, I guess, if you ask me. You can also use one of these phrases. This is an interesting, tough, good question. And we can comment on our state of knowledge on the subject. This is not something I know a lot about, but I've never thought about it before, but this is something I've never given very much thought to, but. And if we put a short phrase together with a longer one, we can master an even longer phrase. That's 5-6 seconds when you can come up with something else to say. Let's try. How will farms look in the future? Well, to tell you the truth, this is something I've never given very much thought to. But I would imagine that farmers will make more use of technology and science to grow things more efficiently. Well, it's still not a very long answer, but the opening phrases helped me come up with this idea about technology, and then the examiner can ask me a follow-up question. In the meantime, I was showing off my English language skills, and after all, that's what IELTS is about. I know you guys always ask for some sample answers. I think it would be nice to talk through a recent Part 3 topic about sharing and look at some questions and answers. Remember what we said about the 3 sets of questions the examiner has to choose from. These begin with more descriptive, factual aspects in set 1 through to more abstract, hypothetical possibilities in set 3. How far can you go? Among the possible set 1 questions, perhaps the bullet point would be learning to share, and a couple of example questions might be: is it important for children to share things with other people? Do you think children are more likely to share with other children or with adults? Let me answer the first question. Yes, I can think of some very good reasons why children should be taught how to share with others. It helps show them that possessions are not everything. For instance, if one kid has a toy and another one doesn't, then sharing that toy together will be fun for both of them. And although they may not be aware of this, It builds friendship and trust. When you meet adults who haven't learned to share, you can see how selfish they've become, and that can make their lives pretty miserable because nobody wants to spend time with someone selfish. Anyway, it's always much better and more effective to do things together. As we pass to set 2, the discussion shifts to sharing feelings. Here are some questions. Are there any times when it is best for people not to share their feelings? What problems does it cause when people are not good at sharing their feelings? Let me answer this one. I'd probably have to begin like this. Yes, that's a difficult question. I mean, a lot of people in my country are not good in this respect. They are not at all open, and that can give other people the wrong impression. If you don't say how you feel, then how are others going to understand you? A lot of people are very shy and are afraid to express themselves, so they often give the impression that they're just not interested in what someone is saying. And that makes it hard for them to form relationships. Or if you can just keep all your feelings inside, there may be a moment when you just explode and say or do something you will regret. So it's important to manage your feelings properly. Finally, in set 3, the most challenging set, we enter a different world of sharing intellectual property. Possible questions? Do you think it is important for scientists and companies to share their research? Why do some individuals or companies spend a lot of money protecting their work from being copied? You do need good English to answer these questions. Let me address the first. Well, I suppose in theory, definitely yes. If we're talking about making things better and about scientific progress, then we should share knowledge. For example, if a pharmaceutical company makes an important breakthrough and produces a vaccine or medicine that saves lives, then it should be shared. We've just seen that. Of course, any kind of cooperation and sharing requires a lot of trust. Maybe in university research it's more open because academics do share their research through publications and conferences, while companies tend to keep their knowledge secret so they can make money of what they call their intellectual property. Remember that the examiner is only interested in your use of English, not if your answer is factually correct or very profound. Now, it's up to you. Practice answering your IELTS speaking questions. And if you'd like to download sample answers to questions asked at the very beginning of your exam, you can do it right here. And all my courses, including those with pre-recorded speaking practice tests, are linked in the description. And that's all for today. Or should I say, that's the end of the speaking test. Bye!